Ladies and gentlemen, I will give you some information on the next phase of our exchanges. We'll have it's a working lunch, so please. I see you are already seated and enjoying the luncheon, and so we'll have two parts of the discussion during the luncheon, and so with the three panelists that I will introduce in a few moments. And so we'll have first a discussion on as it was said before, on the energy aspect with Mark Tyner, and then a presentation of two speakers on the particular experience of their company related to, the European companies here in Louisiana in two different areas of industrial activity. And so while we're waiting for the third speaker, just went out of the room, but is coming quickly back. I just wanted to highlight, since we had this, as a way to introduce our discussion, Mark is coming, that we see in Louisiana, indeed, in many. Please have a seat on your. A very intense cooperation between European companies and know-how and Louisiana companies and U.S. companies here in the area, in many areas. And we spoke about the port and the trade aspect, and I, in my capacity as a consul of France in Louisiana, had here in this last period of time the experience of seeing inaugurations of two main investments of my country here in Louisiana linked to this tremendous trade activity that goes through the Mississippi and the ports here in Louisiana. And the one was Louis Dreyfus Commodities, the grain elevator in Baton Rouge. So that's the grain elevator says already what it means. This shipping, putting the grain on the big ships that go then down the Mississippi, and so that's directly linked to this huge trade in this area, and that goes through the region. And the second was a few days ago at UNO, at the University of New Orleans, the inauguration of the Eurofins laboratory. It's a huge lab that is brand new on the UNO campus, and I learned that it was also linked to the exports to the port, and also because it's about making the tests required, for example, for the seeds or food before their exports. So that's an example to French and European. It's very much European because Eurofins, for example, was started by French engineers a long time ago in Nantes. They were working on tests on the Bordeaux wines. And then they created this company, and actually the lab is a copy of a lab that is in Germany, and there are German scientists working on this lab on UNO. So that shows also how intertwined also our companies in Europe are, and also when they are present here in Louisiana, it's very much for the big groups, and especially in the energy sector, where if you see Schlumberger, Technip, Benteler, Vallourec, other German, Italian, British, Dutch companies, how this input from European companies is important and increasing. And that brings me to the first part of our discussion while we are all enjoying our luncheon. It's to introduce Mark Tyner. I introduced him just before, and he introduced himself, of course. And I just wanted to thank you again, and thank Mark Tyner again for participating to our discussion today. He must be quite busy, or we all know, with the agenda of Senator Mary Landrieu. But so thanks for taking the time to participate to our discussion. And so I don't want to come back to your bio, you mentioned it before, but just to by introducing this particular energy sector where I really, as I mentioned, where I saw also in these past years, I'm being assigned now almost 3 years to Louisiana, and I saw this huge increase of the activities in both in the LNG, as you mentioned, and then also the consequence in terms of petrochemical with the cheap gas and the cheap energy that the petrochemical industry needs very much to be competitive. So in all these aspects, we see a real, again, a European input that is potentially also increasing. You mentioned the SEMPRA project, and that's where GDF Suez is a partner also of the Japanese company. So I would invite you, Mark, to kick off our discussion, so to speak, with this big topic of energy and how far it would bring Louisiana, US and Europe closer together, and especially Louisiana and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Consul, merci pour tout. So I should start out by making a few remarks on a personal level. This is a tremendous honor for me to be here. As a boy growing up north of Shreveport, I can't even claim to be from Shreveport. If I tell someone from Shreveport that I'm from Blanchard, they would say, oh, okay, we know that you're not from Shreveport. That one day I'd be having an opportunity to speak at the World Trade Center in New Orleans would have been a dream for me. So it is a tremendous honor to be here and to thank the World Trade Center for Dominic and your team have done a tremendous job in putting us all together and focusing on this day of celebration, as I think it was termed, between the Louisiana and European Union and the relationship that we have, which is unique. Obviously, we know the historical relationship between New Orleans and France. One of the things that is special to me as it relates to France is that Senator Landrieu is co-chair of the Senate French caucus, and I worked for the caucus for a few years when I worked for Senator Landrieu and worked very closely with the French embassy in Washington. And Cameron Griffith is a good friend, and I've been courtesy of the French government to Roland Garros and among other things. But on a lighter note, we were able to see a ton of very interesting projects when we went to France, including Le Hague and the nuclear facilities there. We also, on a more personal note, because we are going to recognize on Friday the 70th anniversary of D-Day, and Senator Landrieu, in her role as co-chair of the caucus, along with her other co-chair, and with the consent of the French Parliament also, they simultaneously introduced and passed a resolution acknowledging the incredible deeds by the soldiers on the beaches of Normandy 70 years ago this week. So we greatly appreciate the cooperation. I think a lot of times the relationship between U.S. and France gets politicized, unfortunately, and we tend to forget the very noble and important economic and strategic interests that we share. I've been in the national security sector for some time, and the relationship between security that's going on and the cooperation that's happening between France and the United States is a very critical one. And so this week we will remember that, and Senator Landrieu introduced that resolution, and we'll continue to work very closely with our partners in France and around the EU. I should say to Dominic, who is Italian, my fiance is from Italy, and so as we discuss Saints football or the national team of Italy as we get ready for the World Cup, I think the Saints versus what is more important in this conversation, you know, in this on a day like today, sometimes I forget if we're talking about Parmigiano Reggiano or if we're talking about, you know, this or that, or this our version of football versus your version of football. But as someone who went to the last World Cup in South Africa, I'm a huge fan of your version as well, and a huge Saints fan, and I think you can have love for both. And best of luck in the upcoming World Cup. All of the Consuls General, thank you for your participation. Your work is very important to the international flavor of New Orleans. New Orleans is our most unique American city. I think that most people would agree with that have been through here. And as a conversation about export and the relationship between Europe and the United States, one of the interesting things about tourism is that tourism is counted as an export. And so the number of visitors that come to New Orleans is not a small statistic. And the number of folks that continue to visit here on a regular basis is a demonstration of how critical and how important it is, and how much people vote with their economic conscience and they decide to come to New Orleans and have a good time and enjoy themselves and its unique cultural personality that no one else, we believe, shares. I also would say that as we think about that, the economic relationship that is here, which is really why we're here today, is a critical one. I think sometimes that also gets lost, is the tremendous amount of economic activity that emanates from New Orleans. The Port of New Orleans has been a critical part of this country's history for centuries now. And when Thomas Jefferson decided to buy the Louisiana Purchase, the main reason was for international trade. And I would say that that bet paid off very handsomely for both the United States and for Louisianian. We are very proud that New Orleans is always emblematic of the very pride that we have in our state because of its uniqueness, and the things that are being done here. And right now, you can get a sense of the entrepreneurialism that so much a part of the discussion with economic activity is going on, whether it be Silicon Valley or the Silicon Bayou. We tend to think that the Silicon Bayou is going to have a very important place in economic development activity in New Orleans for years to come, and we want to create an environment that welcomes entrepreneurs and that creates a system that creates jobs. Ultimately, all of us around the world are wrestling with this idea of how to create jobs, and that is the number one idea that goes, whether it's a startup business on Magazine Street, whether you go to a restaurant, if you talk to a restaurateur. Yesterday I went to have lunch at Cochon Butcher, and then in the evening I had dinner at Dominica, and it just spectacular food. And these entrepreneurs, because restaurateurs are entrepreneurs just like any other version or sector of the economy, are entrepreneurs. So we recognize those things that are taking place here, but there is also a technology sector here. And then, of course, ultimately, we're here discussing the energy sector, which is the backbone of Louisiana's economy. And one of the original discussions about Senator Landrieu's role recently, she has been involved in energy from the time that she was elected senator in 1997. And to this day, I think that she will admit it and freely talks about the fact that she never imagined that she would be the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee of the Senate. And nor would we have imagined, simultaneous to her chairmanship, would there be an energy revolution that's taking place in this country, where, Monsieur Consul, the conversation that you spoke about, that you've experienced this incredible trajectory of the energy business in Louisiana, that it has occurred not only in the Bakken Shale and other shale formations around the country, but it's happened in this part of the world. And the Gulf of Mexico being the tip of the spear as it relates to large oil and gas concerns is very important. And having the chairman of the Energy Committee it's sometimes you can put it into words that there is a great deal of enthusiasm, but there are subtleties to this job. There are jurisdictional issues related to this job that are enormous. Senator Landrieu has reformed the Energy Committee in the couple of months, I guess now 3 months that she's been chairman of the committee, and there is now an extraordinary focus on international energy. Before, each chairman has the opportunity to reshape the committee in his or her image, and as it happens, her image is an important concept since Senator Landrieu is female, and her ranking member, friend, and Republican counterpart, Lisa Murkowski, both are women. And I don't think that's a very small detail that women are now governing on both sides of the aisle in the Senate on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So they take a very unique and important glimpse into the policy world and are now shaping the policy world. And I will tell you that in all of the very difficult, when you talk about Congress and trade, and you just say Congress and people start to sweat a little bit and get nervous and go, oh my God, can anything get done in Congress? Well, I will tell you, there is definitely a slowdown as these elections approach. But Senator Landrieu and Senator Murkowski work very closely together and have a very positive relationship. So I think that when you've got two members of the Senate from opposing parties that are working in unison. Senator Murkowski is from Alaska, has tremendous energy assets in the state of Alaska, and so she understands many of the issues that are taking place. In some of the committee assignments where you have a chairman and ranking member, you may actually have a tremendous amount of rancor between the chairman and the ranking member. But in this particular relationship, it's a harmonious relationship where they work very closely together to bring about sensible energy policy to the United States. I would say that from a Louisiana perspective, Louisiana, by virtue of the fact that it is the home state of Senator Landrieu, is going to be the tip of the spear as it relates to energy. We are on the cutting edge. The first LNG export facility is in Louisiana. The first one that's been approved is here. It just so happens to be at the same time that this energy renaissance is taking place, and the discussion about the export of energy, which has been a non-approachable discussion since the 70s. We haven't even been able to have a discussion about the export of energy resources until now. And now with the not only the renaissance that has taken place as a result of the technological advances that have taken place with hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, I've seen, and my apologies for not bringing a PowerPoint with me. Sometimes I think that I get distracted by my own artistic abilities, so I chose not to bring that. But if you look at some graphs, there are essentially decades worth of work that led to the technological advances that led to the renaissance that we're seeing today. I'm currently reading a book called The Second Machine Age. If you talk about the steam engine, it took a very long time for the steam engine to finally harness all of its economic power to then translate into what would become the Industrial Revolution. And right now we're seeing technological revolutions that are taking place. There is an energy revolution taking place. 5 years ago, we did not have any idea that we would be in the position that we're in right now. Fortunately, at a time when Vladimir Putin chose to basically invade a sovereign country and create a very difficult, to say the least, I mean, I think all of you have your own versions or descriptions of that scenario, but at a time when Europe is natural gas dependent on Russia, we are in a discussion now about exporting energy to our allies. If there is not energy security for Europe, there won't be energy security for the United States. So it is very essential that we take care of our European partners, and Ukraine will continue to be a critical link in the chain between Europe and Russia. And in fact, Europe has a very strong reason to ensure that Ukraine and many of the practices, unfortunately, that have led us to where we are today, there is endemic corruption. And yet we've got to figure out a way to get Ukraine back online. And so these are very complicated geopolitical issues. Something could break out tomorrow. We're talking about the conclusion of a TTIP by at the end of 2015. If something in the last couple of months could impact global energy supplies and the conversation and the policy changes that are taking place in a very short period of time, you can imagine that over the course of the next year or so, anything can happen. So we have to be mindful of the geopolitics that are always in discussion. It could be Venezuela. It could be, we're talking about EU, but there are places that could break out at any time. So recently, the State Department, who has a large part of the negotiation in the TTIP, they have an energy diplomacy section, and this energy diplomacy section is responsible for engaging in behalf of the State Department with energy resources around the globe. And we heard of the challenges, whether it be the existing infrastructure, which are necessary to transport all of the supplies that we're trying to get from one place to another. That's a European issue that is going to be a very challenging one. In the United States, our own infrastructure relates to what's going on with Keystone. Senator Landrieu is an avid, huge supporter of the Keystone Pipeline and will continue to be so. In spite of the slowdown legislatively at the moment, there are forces that are much bigger than just the politics of this particular pipeline. But this particular pipeline is critical to our advancement, and Senator Landrieu will continue to be the lead on trying to ensure that the Keystone Pipeline is built. The conversation as it relates to LNG and exporting to non-free trade agreement countries, it's one that is being examined. It's one that we're talking about. It's one that Senator Landrieu is leading on. She recently had a hearing in the Energy and Resources Committee and Natural Resources Committee, and the energy chief for the Lithuanian government was there to testify. There are LNG facilities that are coming online in places like Lithuania. There are discussions in places like Croatia and elsewhere. Now, you have concerns, and I want to be optimistic, so I don't want to get too deep into the concerns, but there are concerns, and one of the concerns is in Europe on hydraulic fracturing. Some of the water-based issues and some of the environmental concerns that the EU have as it relates to fracking, hydraulic fracturing, are indeed important ones. But as they understand, certainly after the Ukrainian crisis and Crimea, that it is critical that we open up a line of conversation, and it's going to take some time. Before we're able to build capacity, we actually have to build LNG terminals. And at this point, we've been preparing for the import of LNG for so many years that to turn on a dime, as you can imagine, is this very glacial turn to becoming potentially an exporter of those supplies. So as we go through the policy questions that are important to the state of Louisiana, they have to do with coal. They have to do the export of coal, which is an important one that I think folks tend to forget about because there are so many difficult conversations going on. Yesterday's announcement by the EPA, Senator Landrieu has disagreement that the Environmental Protection Agency should be making decisions that impact industries such as coal without going through congressional action. However, the positive side of the ledger as it relates to coal is that coal is a growth opportunity for domestic producers of coal in Europe. Germany, for example, which has basically said that they don't want nuclear energy, are becoming much larger importers of coal. You know, that conversation is not publicized very much. But there are economic forces there that are driving coal producers to export to places like Asia and Europe, in fact. The LNG question is obviously a massive one. And given the foreign direct investment that's taking place, given the permitting process, and the permitting process is one that is a boring topic for a lot of people. It may not be for the oil and gas crowd. It has recently been run through DOE, and at the urging of Senator Landrieu, the DOE permitting process as it relates to LNG has moved to FERC and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She believes will be a much better place for the massive investments and a much smoother process through which this permitting will move. So you've got coal, you've got LNG, and then you've also got crude oil that we have not been able to touch for some 30 years as well. And crude oil is also something that we are now examining. So the policy equation as it relates to the export of all of these energy resources is something that's on the table. It's in deep conversation on the Energy Committee and among other people, certainly because the backbone of our economy now is energy, certainly in Louisiana, and domestically and internationally. And one thing that I should mention is that technology plays a huge role. We had talked about the drilling technologies that led to hydraulic fracturing and the advances of hydraulic fracturing. Senator Landrieu is very focused on the national labs. One of the issues that I work on is the national laboratories, and some of the drilling technologies where technology transfer has taken place. For example, at Sandia National Labs, Sandia National Labs is our weapons lab for nuclear missiles and other things, and Barksdale Air Force Base in Bossier is the most important bomber base as it relates to nuclear defense issues. And Sandia National Labs recently came in to brief Senator Landrieu about the fact that their technology transfer from their interests and work in the nuclear sector led to their advances in working on hydraulic fracturing advances. And so we're looking for ways to maximize the output of our national labs and the technologies that are coming from them. They're a resource that, again, as we were talking with Caitlin earlier about the fact that sometimes these things are not communicated all around. How can we bring the expertise that are at these national labs to bear in a technologically efficient and cutting-edge kind of way? So we are going to work very closely with them to enhance the environments for them to be able to continue to impact all sorts of technologies, whether they be drilling, hydraulic fracturing, et cetera. There are also issues related to the ports. At the Port of New Orleans, there are draft issues that continually need to be addressed. And the drafting issue is one that we will continually have to work on. And that takes time. The drafting of ports is something that is tedious, and transportation budgets are tight. And you've got ports that are being built and improved and are being impacted around the country. And as the improvements and the opening of the Panama Canal occur, how does the Port of New Orleans, the Port of South Louisiana, et cetera, benefit from the things that we need to do to make sure that we are as competitive as we need to be? So you've got infrastructure issues that need to be addressed. You've also got the LNG permitting issues that are going on, and you've got a number of the energy policy issues that are simultaneously going on at the same time with geopolitics. As you can imagine, it's a tremendous amount of focus, and there is a terrific team in place. And Since Senator Landrieu, one thing I think that should be reported is that when you bring in an addition of a committee, a small business committee was a relatively small committee by assignment as compared to the Energy Committee in terms of its economic weight. You can see large multinational companies that are dealing with very large concerns and economic issues, and then a small business committee issue is on a much lighter economic footprint, but it is incredibly important. And so, trying to balance all of those things as you move from an assignment that is very critical to one that is on a scale that's hard to calculate, frankly. And there is a great deal of enthusiasm. Senator Landrieu is as optimistic and as positive as I've ever seen her. And why wouldn't she be? She's in what we think is the greatest state in the United States, and she happens to be from a city that is unique in the country and indeed the world. And she is eager to use that chairmanship in a way that's going to benefit Louisiana, and it will absolutely be the tip of the spear in terms of all of these things that we're talking about. And I hope that as this conversation matures, that all of you will make sure to keep us informed of what's happening on the ground. Sometimes it's lost when you're in Washington and you're dealing with policy issues about what is happening on the ground. And I do think that we talk amongst ourselves and we try to reach out, but it is impossible to duplicate the person-to-person communication that we do. And by the way, I should acknowledge that there's even someone here from North Louisiana represented. I know that the Ports Association sent out an invitation to folks around the state of Louisiana, and it happened to land at the executive director of the Port of Madison Parish, Terry Murphy, who I go back to even before I was born. And so these issues don't just impact New Orleans or the Port of South Louisiana or the Port of New Iberia or the Port of Lake Charles. They impact certainly statewide. And I think that the attendance here is an indication of the importance of internationalism. And I'll end on this note. For a long time, New Orleans is recognized as an international city. And we have benefited from so many people that have come here from so many different places. And the gumbo that is often mentioned is unique culturally to any other place. We also need to make sure that we're telling our own story. If you're in New York and you happen to have the media apparatus that is New York, you don't have to go anywhere. You can just write a story about how great New York is, and we all love New York, or LA, or wherever the big city might be. But this room is full of people that have an impact on international relations as it relates to New Orleans and the state of Louisiana, because you are the entry point for this state. And I hope that all of us will recommit to focusing not only on what we're doing in the state, but internationally, and this engagement with the World Trade Center, what Dominic and his team and the Consul General are doing, and all of the Consuls General have very important work. And frankly, I hope that we'll be able to re-import some of the Consuls General that went to Houston a few years ago. So that will be part of our lobbying efforts, because we believe that New Orleans is as good and stacks up enough economically that we deserve as many Consuls General as we can have. But thank you so much for all of your participation. It means a lot, and thank you so much for having me.
Merci beaucoup, Marc. And so thank you so much for your very informative and enthusiastic presentation on both on the energy and wider and the international connection of La Nouvelle-Orléans, Nueva Orleans. And I would just to tell you from the French perspective to what you mentioned on the fracking, things are quite moving in the sense that we are in France willing to look into possible shale gas exploitation that would correspond to expectation from the public, and that means safe. And so alternatives to the hydraulic or ways of doing the hydraulic fracking in a way that would make everybody confident about especially the impact on water management. So, but I just wanted to mention it because in our dialogue with Europe, with our individual states, I mean, the thinking is going on, and we come to, I mean, actually quite close to our concerns of both energy security and using our energy resources, and also making the public happy about its concerns. And so that's I would say a good opportunity also to bring Louisiana and Europe together in expertise exchanges and like in other fields. And I think, again, also how you highlighted the diversity of what it means, the energy boom in Louisiana. In coming to Louisiana, I was not not at all, I must say, an expert in oil, and I was more actually involved in the past in the nuclear energy. But I must say the diversity of the fossil fuel dimension, this new revolution, was very amazing, and I just wanted to add to complete the picture to give the indication of how far, for example, the European input is in this tremendous trend in Louisiana these days. I think somebody talked about this French company SNF, and SNF is actually producing polymers, powders, and actually the boom in their activity now is in export to Canada, so for the oil sands. So you see that companies coming to partner with Louisiana on activities here will also help the U.S. exports of certain technologies to neighboring states. So thank you again for your merci, and thank you also for mentioning the 70th anniversary of D-Day. We will on Friday, and I will really have the great honor to represent my country in thanking the 12 U.S. veterans at the World War II Museum next Friday for June 6th for the 70th anniversary, thanking them on behalf of the French people, but I must say the European people, for helping us, our liberation from a Nazi terror regime 70 years ago, risking their young lives. And I will bestow the Legion of Honor on behalf of the French President to these veterans, and I thank you for the words on behalf of Senator Marie Landrieu, and we'll have that will be at the same time when in France we'll have this great visit of President Obama and U.S. officials, and together with all other European and non-European high-level officials present. Thank you for your participation, and I would now like to turn to the second part of our discussion during the luncheon and introduce the two panelists. So representing European companies active in Louisiana in two different fields of activities. And ladies first, I will start with Madame Christine Georges, who is the Vice President for Air Liquide Large Industries and based in Baton Rouge. Thank you, Christine, for participating to this discussion today. And Mr. Joseph Sensebe, Vice President of Arcadis US. And so Air Liquide is a French company in petrochemicals, and Arcadis is a company linked to a Dutch international company, and which started its activities after Katrina, the Hurricane Katrina, and in the water engineering. But Mr. Sensebe will tell us more about it. If I may, then give the floor to start with to Madame Christine Georges for Air Liquide. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say it's a pleasure for me to be here. Really appreciate the invitation, especially the topic of trade between EU and the US, even though it's not my business because I'm more, from an industrial standpoint. But as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm French. Yet I spent a large part of my professional career in the US. I've been with Air Liquide for 21 years, and 12 of those actually have been in the US, 3 in France, only 3, and 5 in Belgium. And just for the story, what's interesting is the 3 years I spent in France were actually after 10 years in the US. And so I moved to France, and of course HR does not understand that, I should be an expatriate in my own country, right? So, but then I'm in a commercial position, and I have to write business letters, and I don't know how to do that in French. So obviously I did not ask for help from my colleagues. I just bought a book. But anyway, just for the story, to illustrate that my heart is really a bit on both continents at this point, and so I'm very delighted to be here in that context. So maybe a few words about Air Liquide. Air Liquide is a French-based company which was created in 1902, and actually we are today in 80 countries, employing about 50,000 people, with revenues of $15 billion. Air Liquide really innovates for the sake of progress, but also in the mindset of striving to align its strategic objective and sustainable development and growth. And so maybe before I get more into a little bit of the history of Air Liquide in the US and specifically in Louisiana, I would like to maybe say a few words about what we do, because I think Air Liquide is a company that's well known by its name, but because we are in the industrial gas company, people tend to just remember the gas part of it, and so I just want to clarify what gases we're dealing with. So maybe I'll pick a few examples, and actually what's interesting is our products are invisible, but they are in everyday's life. I'm going to start with the big one, which is oxygen. It's our main raw material is actually the air, and we separate it into oxygen, nitrogen, and argon in principle. And one of the large use of oxygen to bring it to this area specifically is actually in the use of to produce chemicals. And one of them, which is a basic feedstock, is actually ethylene oxide. Ethylene oxide then can go into different intermediates. Ethylene glycol is one of them. What is that? Well, it's just your antifreeze in your car. But that can also be used as derivatives into other products, including plastics. The little cork on the plastic bottles we have is recyclable plastic, and that's based on ethylene oxide as a feedstock. So you get the story. The oxygen is about everywhere, and those are in large amounts. And that's the business I represent in Louisiana, which is primary manufacturing, where we supply via a network of pipelines large industrial customers. Another example would be hydrogen, which is used heavily by refineries to remove the sulfur from fuels and gasoline, which reduces then sulfur dioxide emissions from the air and reducing acid rains. Another example would be liquid nitrogen, and this one gets closer to our plate here, which can be used in the food industry, and it's used actually for freezing food. You might think, well, why not a freezer, right? The issue with the mechanical freezer is that it freezes much slower, and so the integrity of, I guess, the outside and the appearance is just not going to look as good and taste as good when you defrost it. So liquid nitrogen is heavily used in the food industry for that. Of course, don't play with it. It's extremely cold, and so be careful. The other examples in the electronics industry would be advanced precursors, and those become very sophisticated molecules which can be custom designed, and they are used actually in the manufacturing of wafers to produce smaller and smaller electronics in the nanotechnology that we are in. And the last but not least of the examples would be actually, again, oxygen, but also nitric and nitrous oxides, which you probably heard about, or even xenon, which can be used either in pure form or as mixtures in the medical field. And those gases are actually used in urgent care, emergency rooms for respiratory treatment, but also anesthesia, and in the treatment of permanent pulmonary problems in newborns. So you get the picture. Our gases are not natural gas, but they are used in many applications. However, they are linked to natural gas as far as our growth, and I will come to that in just a few minutes. So now coming back to the, I guess the history of Air Liquide briefly. So it started in 1902, became very quickly an international company, entering Belgium in 1906, Japan in 1907, came to the US first time in 1916. But of course, in the meantime, 2 world wars took place. And after the Second World War, actually, I guess most companies were pushed to divest their shares or their partnerships that they had. So we're not very active after that. And then there was a tremendous development in Europe after the Second World War. And so resources being limited in terms of investments, we focused very much in Europe and did not come back in the US actually until the 60s. And that's in 1968 that we came back through a number of acquisitions through about 1979, 1982, but primarily focused on the, I guess, on the smaller customers. So that would be the products that you would see on the road through the trucks that transport liquid or high pressure cylinders. So that was a good present, but obviously that was not big enough to be fully integrated in the US. So in 1986, Air Liquide took a very blunt step to come back to the US and acquired a company that actually some of you might still remember the name of, which was called Big Three. Big Three was a privately owned company which had a great vision on the Gulf Coast, both in Texas and Louisiana, and they had built those large air separation units, the large production units, which were along the coast and connected by a network of pipelines for oxygen and nitrogen, and as well as hydrogen. And so there were 2 distinct networks, one in Texas, one in Louisiana, and that's what I'm responsible for now. And so that was really a strong comeback in the US with a very strong presence in primary production, which gave us access to a lot of the large chemical and petrochemical industry that was along the Gulf Coast. And so that's how we entered also strongly in Louisiana. So today, in Louisiana, we have about 300 employees, 300 professionals, sales of over 400 million, 12 production units, and a pipeline network, which is about 200 miles, more or less. In terms of production capacity, just to give you an idea, we produce 11,000 tons of oxygen per day. Oxygen is pretty light, so that's quite a few molecules coming out. And we have a big site in Geismar, which is, I guess, about an hour from here, which is also the biggest liquid production hub in the Americas continent. So it's a very significant site. So since the acquisition in 1986, which I forgot to mention, was the largest, even year to date, that Air Liquide made in its history, was $1 billion in cash. So that was very significant. And we have continued to invest in this business since this acquisition. Just since 2000, we invested about $600 million in Louisiana, primarily on expansion of facilities. We built 4 new facilities, including the air separation units as well as a cogeneration in Geismar as well. We also acquired some assets from either customers who had their own, but figured, I'll give that to the specialist in the industry to run that for me. Or sometimes we actually acquired also air separation units from our competitors. So in the last 3 years alone, we invested $200 million to continue to grow and accompany our customers. So we also actually diversified our activities a little bit in acquiring a water treatment business in the Geismar area, water being also very essential to our customers. So now talking about our customers and our gases. Our customers are in the chemical, petrochemical, refining industry, as well as steel, more recently with the investment of Nucor in Convent. And what's important to remember is that for those customers, supply of our gases is absolutely critical to their operations, because typically oxygen is going to be used as either a process gas or a gas that's used to create heat for the process. That's the case of Nucor. Or nitrogen is used for safety reasons, to inert reactive chemicals. So needless to say that being reliable 24/7 is absolutely key to supply our customers and for them to be able to be efficient economically, but also to operate safely. So our customers, in that sense, benefit from our strong network. I mentioned the 12 production units. That's pretty important because obviously we are in the real world, so nothing works perfectly. So we do have some upsets once in a while. And when there is a facility that has a problem, we have another 11 of them to continue supplying the customers. We also supply some smaller customers in a diversity of markets. So they would be the customers supplied by high pressure cylinders or liquid products, and they are in the automotive fields as well as manufacturing, technology, R&D, pharmaceutical, food, so on and so forth. So again, our gas is already everywhere in our lives. So now let me switch gear a little bit here and talk about the future. We see the future as being very bright as far as development and growth in Louisiana. The one thing that's important to remember for Air Liquide is that most of our products, maybe at the exception of argon, are produced and used locally. So what that means is that our growth fully depends on the growth of our customers or the growth of newcomers in the area. So in that respect, we are fully aligned with the state of Louisiana and economic development efforts to try to bring business to this area. So what we see as obviously key drivers for this growth is, first of all, and we've talked about it quite a bit already, is shale gas. Clearly, shale gas has absolutely changed the world, has brought a renaissance, as you said. And why did it from a chemical and petrochemical standpoint? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. What shale gas is bringing is a lot of ethane. And the molecule of ethane, by being produced locally, and the way, instead of using naphtha, which is oil-based, has decreased the cost of ethane by 60%, therefore putting the U.S. in one of the most competitive places as far as the cost of ethane. And ethane is the beginning of the rest of the whole chain in the manufacturing of petrochemical and chemical industry. So that's one of the big driver. I think and so we're confident that the growth in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be definitely driven by that. And specifically for the area, when we look at the customer, the mix of products from our customer base, we're seeing large projects in ethylene oxide, vinyl chloride monomers, which goes into PVC production. Methanol is an interesting one, and I want to just spend a couple of minutes on that. There are tremendous opportunity for methanol production. One of our customers, which is called Methanex, is relocating facilities from Chile. Because natural gas is not, well, there's an issue of availability, but also of competitivity. And so the other thing that actually was put in the press from Methanex was not just relocating existing facility from Chile, but actually even looking at the U.S. as competing with China to bring more methanol here as opposed to China. And I think when we talk to a lot of large industrials and they look at their investment portfolio, the U.S. and the Gulf Coast in particular are becoming extremely competitive versus China. And who would have thought that 5 or 10 years ago, right, when we're seeing all the portfolio of growth going east? So I think that's very heartwarming right here. Number 2, as far as the key drivers, I think, is the access to water. For a number of reasons. Number 1, of course, is water is important for the process itself for large industrials, but also water access as far as access to transportation for feedstock, as well as sending intermediates back out of the door. And I think that's I think with the Mississippi River, Louisiana has really unique opportunity there. And in talking to some of my counterparts in Texas, because we're competing against Texas, it's clear that Texas will be challenged quicker on water than Louisiana will be. Obviously, that comes with its challenge on preserving the environment and the right balance. But definitely, I think there is a tremendous lever which is along the availability of water. Number three, I think, is also the fact that Louisiana has positioned itself in a relatively friendly state as far as economic development. And I think that's important because, we talk about shale gas, we talk about access to water, so you can pretty much think about, the whole Gulf Coast. And again, clearly we're competing against Texas in those type of developments. So I think that's where economic development programs can make a difference and do make a difference, I believe. We know that many of our customers, just like ourselves, have benefited from such programs, whether it comes in the form of tax exemptions or access to some, for a period of time, to economic development power rates. But it's obviously helping. And in my mind, it's helping in two ways. It's making the entry easier, but it also is a long-term strategic decision, because now if we are reinforcing the infrastructure, and if I take the example of the network we have here, the more customers we connect to it, and the more plants that are connected to it, and the more rugged and the more solid, the more reliable, more efficient, and competitive it can be. So it's actually continuing to reinforce the competitiveness and attractivity over long term. And I think that's true on electricity, that's true on natural gas, that's true on anything that requires significant investments up front. So I think that's an important driver as well. And so developing the right programs, economic development programs, is about winning together between industry and the state. So obviously with every opportunity comes some challenges, and I want to be optimistic but also realistic. And some of those challenges, as we see them today, are, first of all, with the boom of activity, we're starting to see engineering and construction costs increase. So obviously that means that we're going to have to be able to manage that. So some people say that it's probably going to mean that maybe instead of a short-term boom, that might be maybe spread over more of a period of time, which would help temper that. The other thing, too, and I know that we're working hard as a company, but also as part of the Louisiana Chemical Association, is on availability of qualified personnel, not just to build those new projects, but also to run those plants afterwards. And so that's obviously is a concern. So there are some programs that are being put in place, and I think, it's going to take both local programs and training and qualification, but also attracting people from outside of the state. And actually in this job, being French and being in Louisiana, of course, I felt home very quickly, right, with the French roots. I'm like, why people would not want to come here? And I think there is something that we can improve here as Louisiana to attract people, because I think after you've been here, you do realize how great a place it is. But unfortunately, I'm not sure that people who have not been here do see that. So I took upon my role to do a little bit of internal communication in my company to attract bright new engineers, and it's starting to work. So I'm sure we can do that at the Louisiana level as well. And then the last thing, of course, is also that through that growth, we also will have to be able to balance, the opportunities with siting, permitting, and environmental considerations. I mentioned the water side earlier. Obviously, the air side is another one, and which will take collaboration between industry and government. And from what I've seen in my short tenure here, only 10 months, that collaboration between industry and government seems to be pretty healthy on those type of topics. But I think it's going to have to be even reinforced given the size of projects that we are talking about. So in conclusion, we at Air Liquide, and I am very optimistic on the future here in Louisiana. I think there are tremendous opportunities which are brought about by abundant natural gas, which is very competitive compared to the rest of the world, and we will see those benefits definitely in the next 3 to 10 years. That will bring large projects. We have no doubt about that. For us, that could mean a doubling or more of our footprint in Louisiana, and that's very exciting. Exciting also for the jobs and the resources, and just in general, I guess, the wealth and the well-being that it can bring to the communities at large, to make the engine sustainable and be able to continue to grow. So those are very exciting times. I'm very fortunate to be part of it, and I'm already trying to prepare my boss to leave me in this job for a number of years, because I think it's going to be an exciting ride. So thank you.
Good afternoon. Everybody's recovering from a very nice lunch. My name's Joe Sebi. I'm with Arcadis US. We are a Dutch-owned global engineering water resources firm, recently celebrating our 125th anniversary globally. So have been in this business for quite some time. We're primarily a water resources focused business, but over the years through acquisitions have grown into other markets. The 2 points I really want to make, since we're talking about economic development and really the ability to export something from Louisiana, something that that is unique to our situations here, and we're able to take to other markets in the U.S. and across the globe. One is somewhat related to the events surrounding Hurricane Katrina and how that has turned into a business not only for our firm, but for firms that have done some of the work as part of the recovery and the development of flood protection procedures and practices locally, and how that has been exported nationwide and even globally. And secondly, how that is sort of formed and developed a unique industry, not just for our firm, but for other firms and for the state. Arcadis was very instrumental in the recovery in South Louisiana post-Katrina early on, especially through the efforts of Senator Landrieu's office. There was a forum that coined a term called the Dutch Dialogues, where members from the folks in the Netherlands, where Arcadis had a long-established history of water resource management, going all the way back to the days of the windmills and water management in a country that was much further below sea level than New Orleans, believe it or not. A country that experienced much more greater frequency of flood events almost every winter, with winter storms that came out of the North Sea and caused havoc along the coastlines there. Development of the large storm barriers and mitigation and protection measures of that type were all types of projects that Arcadis have been associated with in their home country. And then as we grew throughout the U.S. in the 50s, continued to maintain our focus on water resources, water management, ecosystem restoration, and eventually into coastal restoration. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So we have the events of August 2005, and the Dutch dialogue start to take place. We formed this bond through Senator Landrieu's office, through the great folks at the Dutch Council, through the embassies, and start to really this exchange of ideas and philosophies between what's done in Europe and what is done primarily here in southeast Louisiana relative to hurricane protection, whose favorite legalized term, once you get enough attorneys involved in it, is now what's called risk reduction, flood risk reduction. So we try to mitigate and manage those risks rather than wholesale protection. But how we were able to, in the very early days, take those dialogues, start an exchange of ideas, start an exchange of how we do things, how things are done in the Netherlands, how a contingency from the Netherlands come to South Louisiana and visit with the leadership and the stakeholders here in South Louisiana. How those same folks, the folks in the Netherlands, were a great host to those same folks going to the Netherlands and seeing the systems and participating in some of the forums that took place there. And eventually how that all came to trying to develop an approach that best fit South Louisiana. Arcadis played a major role in all of this. We were the primary designer and engineer of record for a lot of the projects in this part of the state. Arcadis is the designer of the world's largest drainage pump station in the West Closure Complex, which is located on the West Bank. A subject that's near and dear to my heart since I'm a kid from St. Bernard that kind of worked his way up the food chain a little bit. But we're the primary designers of all of the flood walls and flood protection measures in St. Bernard Parish. Designer of the Seabrook Closure Complex, which is located near the Lakefront Airport on the Industrial Canal. We're a technical consultant to the Corps of Engineers for the storm barrier out in New Orleans East, and associated with many of the projects that were part of the $13 billion recovery that was led by the Corps of Engineers. What did that do, aside from being a great thing for Arcadis? Well, it afforded an opportunity for us to really invest for Arcadis, not only as a U.S. firm headquartered out of Denver, but as a global firm, make a significant investment in bringing that technology and bringing that science and that engineering and those type of processes to South Louisiana. What it did was it allowed young engineers and scientists on both the private sector and from the federal sector, from the state sector, and all the stakeholders that participated in these projects to really learn something new, learn something different, learn something that was unique, or at least we thought was unique until a couple of years ago with Superstorm Sandy, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it was just a wonderful opportunity that came out of all of the destruction and the strains of recovery to really form a new industry. That, probably coupled with the BP incident, has really showcased, if you can do such a thing, it's the good that comes out of all this, how some of the other investments in South Louisiana have created a very unique industry that's being now exported along the Gulf, exported throughout the U.S., and exported throughout the globe. So we have all this talent that's now focused in the metropolitan area, South Louisiana, where we're focusing on rebuilding the flood protection system. I've been in this 30 years, so it's still the hurricane protection system. And we've got all these folks that are getting smarter, that are getting, learning more about different ways to look at things, the way things are being done in the Netherlands, the way things are being across the globe. Now comes along two significant other national events, and that's the BP incident and Superstorm Sandy. And I was telling some folks a story earlier on. To be a native New Orleanian and growing up in St. Bernard and experiencing everything that I did personally, now the folks here in Louisiana, the folks in South Louisiana, are being viewed as the experts. I was recently in New York where we're competing and doing work in Lower Manhattan for flood protection in Lower Manhattan. And it's so refreshing now to walk into those environments. And folks really don't want to hear about the doom and gloom anymore. They want to hear about the recovery. They want to hear about what did you do, how did you do it, how fast did you do it, what are you going to do for us? And oh, by the way, you need to get started now. And that's how we've become recognized as sort of the expert, and not just Arcadis, but other firms and other entities that have grown out of that event. Folks just want that's recognized that there is an expertise and a unique experience that has come out of those days and years after Katrina. That is, one that happens to them. They don't want to reinvent the wheel. They want to be able to tap that expertise, those lessons learned, the ability to deliver, and bring those solutions to them immediately. That's great. What's also happened is there's sort of an industry and an investment in South Louisiana that has also grown out of that. relative to hurricane protection, flood mitigation, ecosystem restoration. As two events kind of collided in a good way with the BP incident and Katrina, have grown what is called the Water Institute of the Gulf. It's an institute, sort of a public-private partnership, modeled somewhat after some of the partnerships in Europe and the Netherlands, where you develop a center of expertise. This center of expertise for the Gulf, but now what is growing into a center of expertise for the U.S. is now calls Baton Rouge its home. And what is happening is through LSU and the other universities in the area and in the Gulf, along the Gulf Coast, private entities are making investments in trying to become, or will become, not trying, they will become the brain trust, the think tank, the center of expertise for all things flood management, flood mitigation, ecosystem restoration. What was very key in making that happen was post BP, as all of the Restore Act and litigation and application of fines and whatnot were being discussed and managed and who's going to do what, it sort of put Louisiana at the forefront for two reasons. One was they were the greatest impacted, right? I mean, the state of Louisiana, the coastline of Louisiana, the industries, people of Louisiana were most impacted by the BP incident. But second, Louisiana was ready to go. Through investments through the state, through the governor's office, the Office of Coastal Protection and Restoration, the state, for which Arcadis was a major contributor, had a master plan in place for the restoration of the Louisiana coastline over the next 30 years. Right during the BP events, that master plan was in place and ready to be implemented. There again, two good things happened. One was there's going to be some financial contributions as a result of the BP incident to the state of Louisiana. Secondly, there again, the Senator's office playing a major role, is the reallocation of all revenues to the state of Louisiana, and how the citizens and the governments of Louisiana have made a decision that the primary investment of that reallocation of royalties is going to be to coastal restoration. So here's Louisiana ready to go with the master plan in place, the revenues from the BP incident, the revenues due to the reallocation of oil revenues, has a plan to address coastal restoration and the recovery of our coastline. A little bit of a tie there to the energy sector. I mean, things have happened in the energy sector for decades that I'm sure many decades ago was thought to be the right thing to do, and it's just time helps us recognize and adjust accordingly to those decisions, and that's what's happening now. And there again, that's what's happening with this development of this expertise in Louisiana, where not only Arcadis has been the beneficiary of developing its own staff and making investments in trying to continue to make us a leading industry provider of these services, but now the state is also getting that recognition. We're becoming an exporter of this brain trust, this brain power, this knowledge, where in California, people are coming to us and others that have experienced this type of situation here, where Bay Delta, how are we going to do coastal restoration there? Chesapeake Bay, how are we going to do ecosystem restoration? The Everglades, we're learning a little bit from them, they're learning a little bit from us on the restoration projects there. And now for us, prominently has been Superstorm Sandy and the recovery efforts in Lower Manhattan, Coney Island, the areas around Jamaica Bay, where they're again not interested in reinventing the wheel. We want to, you figured it out, the great recovery that took place in the protection systems in South Louisiana post-Katrina are recognized, and we want you to bring that to us now. That is, like I said, just so refreshing to be able to see how there's the good coming out of such an event for the folks here in South Louisiana, that now we're being recognized as a center of expertise to be able to provide those services here and across the globe. We've had references. There's a gentleman that's our global water resources director out of Amsterdam, Pete Durkee. He is many times has sung the praises of the folks of South Louisiana and their ability to recover, the ability for the stakeholders here to make those investments, make those decisions, some tough, to be able to guide the community back to where it is today and has still some ground to cover, but well on its way. So I wanted to focus just a little bit on just not how that's benefited Arcadis, but how it's really benefited the region and how it has become an exportable item rather than grain's important and steel's important and coal's important and petrochemical products are important as they're exported out of the city. But all too much now, you know, the U.S. is somewhat kind of beaten up a little bit unfairly about its inability to export more on the brain, the smart side, the brain side, the technology side of things. And this is a great example of how these events have led to the development of this specialized industry, specialized talent, working with the universities here. LSU now has a coastal restoration, a coastal engineering program, and how we've been able to take all these events and get them to collide sort of in a good place, and now being recognized as a leader for these type of services and these type of industries across the U.S. and across the globe. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on just a little softer export that the state enjoys, and look forward to much greater success and seeing more of that positive feedback from across the country as we continue to work on these type of projects. So, enjoyed being here. Thank you very much. And for our out-of-towners, I hope you enjoy your stay here in New Orleans. And I heard some great restaurants mentioned already. There's always the one next door to that one. If one of those can't take you, there's one next door that can literally take you and serve just as a fabulous meal as the one you wanted to go to. So don't be shy to stick your head in the door. So thanks again. Enjoyed being here, and you'll enjoy your stay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this great summary. I know if you have looked at your schedule, and every one of you was on time today, and so we run a little bit over, but we want to make sure that we get you out in the next couple of minutes. Just bear with us. Now I would like to call on Honorary Consul of the Netherlands, Connie Willems. Please, if you can come up, because I think you will, or we have worked on it with excitement. I think you might like it as well.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. I'm here in my capacity as Dean of the Consular Corps. As you may know, we have 57 consuls in Louisiana, and we are trying to increase that number. However, a lot of people, first of all, don't know what consuls do, and I'm not going to talk about that right now. But at the initiative of the Consular Corps, we commissioned a study that the World Trade Center, and particularly some of the people in this room, like Jessica and Sandra, have worked on. It is economic ties between Louisiana and the world. It's hot off the press. And it shows on each page of a country the import, exports, the impact that that particular country has on job creation in the state, and also has number on foreign visitors and tax-free shopping. And it shows that so a subset of all the import and export of Louisiana, those 57 countries, but they created 177,000 jobs here. So it shows the importance of the Consular Corps, and pretty soon we will make this available. And I'm sorry. I hope your ears don't fall off your head. I want the first copy of this to go to Senator Landrieu, and if you don't mind of accepting that on behalf of the Consular Corps and the World Trade Center.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. And I said to all of you, please watch out. We're going to send it out to you as well when it's then ready. And I think it's a very comprehensive report about what the consul generals and honorary consuls do for their country and how they create those very, very valuable links that we are using, or us at the World Trade Center certainly, but I know many, many of you throughout the year. Before I like to conclude, we have some time for Q&A. I said it's running over, but if there is one or two questions, I certainly would entertain. So, is there any questions for the panelists? All right, I think I scared you with my now we need to get out of here. So, but if there's no questions, I'm sure the panelists will be here afterwards a little bit. So please feel free to go directly to them and ask your question. I also would like to point out something on a personal matter of World Trade Center. Every one of you has something like this in front of you. It's called Exploring Perspectives of Our Nation's Top Executives. And this is something that we actually will host. We have 4 outstanding speakers, all or close to all CEOs of Fortune 100 companies who gonna join us at the World Trade Center. They're gonna talk about security with the former 4-star General Chief of Staff of the United States Army, who's now one of the largest defense contractors in the country and CEO of that company, being here. The CEO of Whole Foods will be here talking about food security. The CEO of Qantas Oil Services will be here talking about oil and gas and energy, as well as we will have. And so you find this, it's a breakfast. The dates are on June 23rd, July, September, and December. Besides that, I also want to announce something that is quite great, and we're very happy to have him here. He will be here, I think, July 17, and that is going to be the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, who will also address our folks in terms of energy, natural gas, how many things that we have heard before. And so we're very excited to have him here. And without further ado, I said it was a great pleasure that every one of you could come today. Although it was, as I said, it was a summit, it wasn't an event, but we were very, very happy to have you. Please look out for our emails, and thank you so much again. Thank you.